friend, Ambassador Robert O'Brien, and his wonderful wife, Lo Marie, drove down from Los Angeles. Ambassador O'Brien presently serves as President Trump's special presidential envoy on hostage affairs. Whenever you see an American getting out of a dark and dank prison somewhere or out of a jungle, it's because Robert O'Brien has been on the scene, working around the clock behind the scenes to get that individual home. And he's been very successful. President Trump has brought home more hostages than I think any president in modern history. Before his distinguished career as a hostage negotiator, he is a partner in the law firm of Larson O'Brien in Los Angeles. He was my law partner for a lot of years, so he's not that smart, and tricked him into that. But before that, he served as a special representative of the UN General Assembly. He served on a number of different State Department assignments. He's a wonderful dad and a wonderful friend, but most importantly, he's been a friend and a counselor to Buzz Aldrin for many years, and more than anyone else in this room, I think, can really bring home to us how special the man we are honoring tonight. So Ambassador O'Brien, will you please join us up here and do that?
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction, Hugh. Hugh and Betsy are dear friends, and Hugh is one of America's great public intellectuals. Early in his career, and he knew President Nixon. He wrote with President Nixon. He worked with President Nixon, and so it's altogether fitting that he's now returned to the Nixon Foundation, and he'll continue President Nixon's mission here at the foundation. So it's a loss for our law firm, but a great gain for the Nixon Foundation. So thank you, Hugh, for the kind words. So it's a high honor for me to be here at the Nixon birthplace and library. My family has a small connection to the Nixon family. My grandmother, Mary Hinchman Hutton, was friends with Hannah Milhouse Nixon back in Indiana. And they moved out to California at about the same time. And they visited each other when they were here. And my mom, as a young woman, was able to come out to the Nixon home when RN was vice president. And so it's very nice for me to be back here in this special place. And so thank you for inviting me to be here, Hugh. I bring you, ladies and gentlemen, greetings from our Secretary of State, Michael Pompeo. Like Colonel Aldrin, Secretary Pompeo is a distinguished graduate of West Point. And he will follow in Buzz's footsteps again. Having followed him to West Point, he'll follow him here to the Nixon Library, and my understanding is he'll be speaking to all of you at some point before the end of the year, and is looking forward to it. So tonight it's my privilege to introduce my friend, my longtime client, and one of my heroes, Buzz Aldrin. Now, it's a daunting task to introduce Buzz Aldrin because Buzz really doesn't need any introduction. I wish the film would have played after I spoke rather than before I spoke. I mean, it's sort of like introducing Christopher Columbus or Meriwether Lewis, except for the fact that Columbus and Lewis did not walk on the moon. But on that great night, July 20, 1969, Buzz and Neil Armstrong were the first two men to walk on the lunar surface, and Michael Collins circled above them in Columbia. It's hard to say anything but wow. At the time, it was the largest TV audience in history. Over 500 million people around the world watched those footsteps. Buzz, Neil, Michael, and the many thousands of men and women who participated in the space program accomplished one of the greatest feats in human history. It inspires us, and I think as we clapped during the video, it inspires us with awe even today, half a century later. Buzz and his crewmates have received every trophy, every recognition that the space or aeronautics industry has to offer. In addition to the actual degree, PhD he received from MIT, Buzz has received numerous honorary degrees from universities around the world. He is a man of science. He has patents and inventions to his name. He's also one of those rare men who's a man of science, but also a man of letters. He's written best-selling memoirs, best-selling novels, and children's books. He's received scores of military and civilian medals, both here and abroad. I'll focus on just two of those because they're the highest civilian honors that the United States of America can bestow. On August 13, 1969, upon returning home at a dinner just up the freeway in Los Angeles, honoring the Apollo 11 astronauts, President Nixon presented to Buzz, Neil, and Mike the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Buzz, by the way, is wearing the Medal of Freedom around his neck, and if you're ever around senior officers, 3-, 4-star generals, it's amazing to see how quickly they stiffen up in a salute when they see that medal around Dr. Aldrin's neck. Vice President Spiro Agnew read the citation at the dinner, and the citation is, as a member of the crew of the United States spacecraft Apollo 11, he participated directly in a unique and profoundly important adventure. The accumulated scientific knowledge and technological ability of mankind made man's first step on the moon practicable. The courage and skill of men like Buzz Aldrin made it possible. His contribution to this great undertaking will be remembered so long as men wonder and dream and search for the truth on this planet and among the stars. Richard M. Nixon. Of the approximately 600 Medal of Freedom recipients, only 26 have been given the award with distinction. So if we were in white tie tonight, Buzz would be wearing a blue sash over his right shoulder. He'd be one of 5 living Americans who has that right. So on receiving the Medal of Freedom that night, with typical Aldrin humility, Buzz said, "There are footprints on the moon. Those footprints belong to each and every one of you, to all of mankind, and they are there because of the blood, the sweat, and the tears of millions of people. These footprints are a symbol of the true human spirit." It took 40 years for the legislative branch to catch up with President Nixon. On August 7, 2009, the Apollo 11 crew and John Glenn, the first man to orbit the Earth, were given the Congressional Gold Medal. The Congressional Gold Medal is equal in prestige to the Medal of Freedom and is awarded by an act of Congress. As a result, there are far fewer recipients of the Congressional Gold Medal than even the Presidential Medal of Freedom. The number of men and women who hold both is extremely small. Buzz is known to the world as many things. A West Point graduate, a distinguished graduate of West Point, top of his class. An Air Force fighter pilot who downed MiGs over Korea, a combat veteran. An astronaut, a moonwalker, a scientist, Dr. Rendezvous, an explorer of the poles, explorer of the deep seas, the inspiration for Toy Story's Buzz Lightyear. Perhaps he's most proud of his comedic actor experiences on The Simpsons and 30 Rock. As his lawyer, I know something a little different about Buzz. I know him as a man of honor and high integrity. And I'd like to share with you just 2 brief stories to illustrate the Buzz that I know that maybe all of you don't. I'll probably violate the attorney-client privilege, but no one's going to report me to the state bar here. So some years ago, we were litigating a right of publicity case on behalf of Buzz and on behalf of the widows of 2 Apollo astronauts, Nancy Conrad and Mary Irwin. We were litigating that case against a toy company that had appropriated their images without, and their names and likenesses without paying them and without receiving permission. The company was very worried about a trial, about a jury seeing Dr. Aldrin, an American hero, sit down in front of them and testify, why this hurt him. As a result, they offered him a very large settlement to resolve the case. They offered the widows, however, next to nothing. Now, as his lawyer, I was ethically responsible and required to convey that offer to Dr. Aldrin, and he was entirely free to accept the offer. And his response was classic Buzz. He said, "Do they really think," I've got this written down in my journal, "do they really think that I would abandon my comrades' wives and take that offer?" And I can tell you that it was one fun phone call to call opposing counsel and relay that to him in response to the settlement offer. Now, eventually the case did settle. And it was a fair settlement with fair compensation for all of the plaintiffs, including Nancy and Mary, who were grateful to Buzz. In another case, one of the largest liquor companies in the world expropriated the famous visor shot that we probably see around here somewhere. I know it was outside, but the famous shot of Buzz on the moon. And they used it in leading magazines around the planet to sell one of their products. It was done without Buzz's knowledge and without his permission. Now, they would have paid a king's ransom to continue to use that image that had alcohol splashing over the visor shot. Buzz told me he did not want to become that company's version of Joe Camel. He was not going to have his famous moonwalk, Neil's famous moonwalk, lead to children buying those products. And the ad was pulled. The company apologized. I could share with you many other stories of this nature, but you get the idea. And in an era when too many of our heroes let us down, what a blessing it is for us as Americans, but also for everyone in the world, that Buzz, that Neil, and Mike did not let us down and have not let us down. They have not faltered, and they've remained the heroes that the world needs today. So now, if I can ask Hugh and Lisa Argyros to please join me up on stage. Buzz, it is now Lisa's, Hugh's, and my distinct pleasure to present you with the Richard M. Nixon Foundation's Greatest Comeback Award, as your comeback from the moon to the earth was truly one for the ages. Congratulations, Buzz. Please join us on stage.
I'm going to start with the thing I think Buzz does most is inspire people. And you heard it mentioned earlier that let's quiet as much as we can down. The servers will be quiet. Buzz writes children's book, Welcome to Mars, Making a Home on the Red Planet. So Buzz, I want to start with this. I'd like you to tell people about that book, and I'm going to have you sign it to a science teacher to inspire her. Tell us about why you wrote a book about going to Mars.
So many young people just think of another planet up there and the Martian. But this book gives you a very complete explanation, and it was written by a lady who has written children's books before, and she was also a mission controller in Houston for a number of missions, so she understood just what space flight was all about.
Well, I think that's a perfect way to get science teachers involved. That's terrific.
Oh, it's just wonderful. And, I mean, she put together things in here, and it amazed me, you know. I even, hate to say it, but I learned a couple things myself. And I wrote the book. But it is really so well done. And if you start reading it, it'll go through the whole night or a week maybe. There's always going to be something in here. Now, did you know what angle the ecliptic is?
Well, I don't want to show off.
But you do.
No.
Well, the ecliptic is 23.5 degrees above the equator. Now, what is the ecliptic?
You're asking the wrong guy.
That is the orbit, the plane of the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And most other planets are quite close to that. Mars is about a degree or less. So if we can stay pretty close to the ecliptic, we can go from Earth to Mars. And that's what my sketches tell me. I was a computer guy when I was at MIT. You know, punch cards and big sheets to get the results. But today I'm really kind of a seat of the pants person who understands the sine waves that describe most everything, motions and sine waves and combinations of them come pretty close. It's just that you got to know where to apply them here and there. I ran into an interesting young fella who was very good in doing this, and I got him enrolled in a PhD program. And now he's going to be sort of my protege in how do you get into a polar orbit around the moon.
Well, terrific. I want to move on from there to your childhood.
Of course. You get me talking about orbits.
Science. But you can't, you know what? Would you sign that to Kathy on the front? Because I want a science teacher to have that. I'm going to have you actually sign that to a science teacher.
Okay.
All right. Now, what I want to...
K or C?
K. K. And while he's signing that, I'm going to read to you a little bit about Buzz you may not know. Buzz is born in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. So something... I know those are from your buddy.
Oh, wait just a minute. Mountainside Hospital.
Okay.
The maternity ward is right smack on the border between Montclair and Glen Ridge. Now, we beat Glen Ridge in football by some 20-0 or more. It's a little small place. My name is not Edwin Eugene Aldrin Jr. anymore. I legally changed it. It is Buzz. Plain Buzz.
You graduated, this was not mentioned by Ambassador O'Brien, you graduated third in your class. Mike Pompeo was first in his class, but you then got a PhD, which Mike Pompeo did not get, from MIT. Am I right about that?
Well, actually, you know, it's a SCD. It's more technical, a Doctor of Science.
Well, I want to go back before that because you
PhD
is what? PhD's a little lower?
well, you give a snow job to the professors and you get a PhD.
Buzz, can be a great interview. Ulysses S. Grant, great American president, wrote this: I read but few lives of great men because biographies do not, as a rule, tell enough about the formative period of life. What I want to know about is what the man did as a boy. I do too, Buzz Aldrin, I would like to know if there was a math or a physics teacher or somebody, your mom or your dad, who turned you into an explorer of the great beyond.
Well, certainly my father's aviation history is really very admirable and had a great influence. From a Swedish family, he was born in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Oh, what's the...
And he graduated from high school in short pants at 15, went to Clark University there. His physics professor was Robert Goddard. He got a master's degree from Worcester Polytech, then started at MIT in Cambridge. And this is 1919 now. And he was called into the service, and they wanted to put him in the Coast Artillery. He said, no. Listen, I'm writing my thesis here at MIT on spinning airplanes. You're going to have to put me in the Signal Corps. That's where the airplanes were then. So his first assignment was to the Philippines as an aide to Billy Mitchell. Come on, explain it to the other people at the table. The Court Martial of Billy Mitchell was a great movie when I grew up. I don't want to go into those details, but my father was involved in the formation of the engineering school at McCook Field, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, became the Air Force Institute of Technology. And to just show you how things come around, the Air Force Institute of Technology paid for my doctor's degree at MIT. Now, when my father was in the Philippines with he ran into an Army chaplain who had 2 daughters and a son, and he sort of took a fancy to the older daughter, and so they were pretty close. So Dad decided to go back to the States and come back and get married so that then they could come back and ride elephants, not elephants, but camels around the pyramids. Now her name was Marion Moon. That's right. And I had an uncle, Bob Moon, and a cousin, Bobby Moon. I don't know why that happened that way, but it just did. And so when I was kind of a youngster and sort of the shortest guy in my 6th grade class, they did The Wizard of Oz. I'm the wizard. 7th grade, I was beginning to learn boys and girls. And that continued on, not all that successfully. But I went to summer camp. So when somebody says to me, "Were you a Boy Scout? You must have been an Eagle Scout, right?" Yeah. No, I was a tenderfoot. Because I went to summer camp from age 9 until 16 up in Maine. And that's where I really learned camaraderie with other boys the same age, a little higher, a little younger, and competition, all sorts of competition the whole summer long. It was Trout Lake Camp and you were either a T for trout or you were an L for lake. And there was competition that went on the whole summer. And at the end, whoever won ate turkey, and the losers ate beans. So you didn't want to be a loser and eat beans, because you would have to come back the next year and try again. From this, I went into high school, and I considered myself a pretty good scat-back. So I went out for quarterback, but I didn't know how to throw the football. But this was the kind where you started in a T formation and you shifted to a Notre Dame box, and the quarterback became a blocking back. And now I was in the process of figuring out where I wanted to go after high school. And my father had been in the Pacific during World War II, and he kind of came to the conclusion that there were more successful businessmen from the Naval Academy than there were from West Point. So he wanted me to go to the Naval Academy. And I said, no, you don't understand. We went out deep sea fishing off of Maine, and I got sick. You know, and besides that, I want to fly. Why in the world would I ever want to land an airplane on a ship that's bouncing around in the water and very short landing strip? No. I want to go to West Point. There wasn't an Air Force Academy then. So I enrolled in West Point, almost the youngest, 17 from the youngest in the class at age 17. And this is in 1947, and the Unification Act split apart the services, so there was the U.S. Air Force. And about that time, they began thinking about a separate service. So at West Point, I began to put my sights on being able to graduate and enter into the Air Force. Now, big distinction between the wisdom of the Army, West Point, and the Navy. At West Point, you get your choice of branch based on merit. Merit is your rating in military leadership and your academic reading. Not the Naval Academy. It's a lottery that tells whether you're in the submarines or a battleship or a minesweeper or sitting on the ground. Now, this successful businessman, now at West Point they teach leadership. Leadership of a platoon, second lieutenant, a company, first lieutenant, captain, a battalion, then kind of up the line, and your performance is measured by the performance of those underneath you that you're leading. So it really stresses leadership.
But you become a pilot, Dr. Aldrin, and Robert O'Brien mentioned this, and I'd like you to expand on it.
Let me just finish.
All right.
Because my father said, or the conclusion is that West Pointers become insurance salesmen, and the Naval Academy people become successful businessmen. And that's because at the Naval Academy, your first assignment as an ensign is on a minesweeper, a or a destroyer, and the captain deals with the sailors, but he has bosun mates and warrant officers and all sorts of other layers of people. But the ensign doesn't deal with the sailors that much. His job is to look above the chain of command, above his captain, to the higher authority, and he kind of makes friends up there and finds out what is expected of his captain. In the business world, this is called networking. And that's why the Navy seems to get more money out of Congress than the other
I knew
service.
you were going there with that. What you don't know is I got a son-in-law who flies those F-18s that land on aircraft carriers, so I think it's in the Naval Academy grad, so I think he objects to everything. Yeah, he just objects to everything you said, but that's okay. I want to talk to you about...
He's going to be a successful businessman?
Oh, no, he's...
Not sell insurance.
No, he's staying in the Navy. I want to talk to you about Korea, because I didn't know this until I read your bio. 55 combat missions, you down 2 MiGs. I would like you to tell the audience what's more stressful, a dogfight with a Korean or a Chinese pilot in which your life is on the line, or a moon flight which you're not certain how it's going to go. What level of stress, how do those two things compare?
The space flight starts, and I mean, you start, you train, you prepare for this, you see other flights go, you learn all about what you're supposed to be doing, and hopefully there isn't anybody shooting at you. Now, in combat, you take off with a flight of 4, and you're a wingman on the leader, or you're an element lead, and then there's a wingman. It's called a fingertip formation. This is the leader. No other remarks, but here's his wingman, the element lead, and there's the wingman. So you're dealing with 2 attack portions, and you can play those sort of high and low. And of course, in Korea, the MiGs were very light, and they could fly higher than we could. But we could see them kind of moving south, and we knew sooner or later they'd have to turn around and start going north again. So I had Sam on my wing. Sam had gone through pilot training with me in Florida, Texas, and then Las Vegas, where we were learning gunnery training, air-to-air gunnery, shooting at a tag, at a target, and then strafing, dive bombing. So Sam was flying on my wing, and the leader and his wingman went one way, and so we were looking to see when these MiGs were going to start heading north to get back home. And sure enough, there were a couple of them. And so by the time we got behind them, we were maybe 2,000 feet behind, and that's not really close enough to get much of a hit by shooting at them, but you might scare them a little bit if you fire at them. And if they turn, why, then you can begin to intercept them. Well, they didn't turn, but I was persistent, and I kept going. Then I looked at my gas gauge, and it's getting kind of low, so I said, "Hey, Sam, we got to go home." So I turned around and headed back south to our base. Looked around, no Sam. No, Sam, where are you? Where are you? Be right with you. He was still following them north. This is Sam Johnson, congressman
From Texas.
from Texas. Shot down in an F-105, 6.5 years as a POW in Hanoi Hilton. A distinguished congressman.
And he was your wingman.
He was my wingman. So he's behind me, and I said, hey, Sam, I'll make a circle. That's a 360 over Pyongyang, and maybe you can catch up. Well, not quite, but we headed to the base, and he had to shut the engine down and glide, and then start the engine up and make a landing. It wasn't our home base, but it was one a little further north. We got on the ground, got in the telephone to talk to the squadron commander. Man, was he pissed off. God. Well, the first MiG was real easy. We were just looking. The guy must have been training. And there were two of them down there just south of the river. So I had a second lieutenant. I was a second lieutenant. And so I went down and just gradually closed up on him. Easy as could be. Snuck up behind, started shooting. And then I see the canopy comes off and a flash, and the guy ejects. First gun camera film they ever had of a MiG pilot ejecting, and it made Life magazine picture of the week.
Oh, you've done that a few times.
May 14th, 1953.
You've done that a few. Well, compare it though to the level of stress in the moon landing. That's combat. Someone is shooting at you, but versus the danger of the mission. Do you consider them similar at all?
Not really, because the computer and mission control are in control. If they're not, you turn around and go back home. If you don't have communication with the Earth, or if you have other difficulties anywhere, you're just going to abort the mission and go back home. And of course, on Apollo, we had one launch vehicle, the Saturn, and the command module, and the lunar module. And the three of us, we got into lunar orbit. Neil and I got into the lander, separated, made the landing, and kicked up dust for a while, a couple hours, got back in again, fired up the engine and made a rendezvous. That was my specialty at MIT, rendezvous in space.
That's your dissertation, isn't it? That's your dissertation.
Yes, yes. And there were two programs that were considered for Apollo. One was a very big rocket specialized by Werner von Braun in Huntsville. And he wanted to build this big rocket. The only trouble is it wouldn't quite be ready by the time that President Kennedy wanted us to get to the moon. So he could use two Saturn V's and put up a big rocket, then put the crew up, join them together, go to the moon, and a very big spacecraft. And this was going to cost a lot of money, and it took two big rockets. But an engineer from another NASA center, John Houbolt, didn't know him then, but I sure got to know him later because he sort of became a role model for me. And he's the one that developed sending two spacecraft together. One of them would separate, make a landing, then it would come back up and rendezvous with the other spacecraft. So in 1961 and early 62, there was this debate going back and forth. And I'm working on my thesis of Rendezvous. And I finally finished it up around the end of 62. And that was about the time that it was decided that lunar orbit rendezvous was going to be the way we would go to the moon. Now, I turned in my thesis, but now we're going to do something around the moon instead of around the Earth. So I picked up my punch cards and changed the gravity of the Earth or the gravity of the moon. And it worked out fine. So you talk about timing. Now, it just happened that what I had evolved in the way of concentric orbit, going from one orbit to another in a rather simplified rendezvous, came along at just the time that a decision was made that that's the way we're going to go to the moon. Now, we had a whole Gemini program, 2 people in the spacecraft to practice that, along with long-duration flight, computer entry, and spacewalking. Now, spacewalking was giving us a good bit of trouble because people were getting fogged up or not being able to keep their feet in the foot restraints. And we just had a hard time getting it successful. Well, as it turned out, I finally got to fly on a backup crew that would then make a primary mission. And it was because of an accident on a mission that killed my backdoor neighbor. So a little bit of tragedy came along and gave me the opportunity to fly in that 2-man Gemini program. So I became the person on the last flight who was going to do a spacewalk with a backpack maneuvering unit, which was fairly difficult. But some people, a couple of engineers in Baltimore, had been trying to help NASA, and there was a boys' school, McDonough Boys' School, and they had a big swimming pool. And these 2 guys figured that if you could put on a spacesuit and put certain weights around you so that you would be neutrally buoyant, that it would be just like being up in space in a vacuum where there are no forces really working against you, and if you move slowly, it's going to be just like you were in space. So they proposed this, and a couple of astronauts said, "Oh, you're crazy. How can this possibly simulate being up there in a vacuum and no gravity?" Not actually no gravity, because your centrifugal force and the gravity are equal, so you tend to float. But I thought it was a good idea because I'd been a scuba diver for 9 years. So I got involved in doing this as the first astronaut to train for spacewalking underwater. And it worked out wonderful. Except NASA did not want to have a partial success on the last mission. So we cut out that wonderful backpack where if I had gotten into the backpack and cut loose, I'd have been sort of flying around at the end of a 100-foot tether that was just going to get you into trouble. But if any of you saw the movie Gravity, you remember George Clooney?
Yes.
Flying around in that backpack? I'm jealous.
I want to
That's
show,
what-
Buzz.
That's what I was going to do.
I want to show some clips of the mission and then come back and ask you a couple of questions if we can show all three of them, and then we'll come back and ask. They're behind you, Buzz. You might not be able to see them. Chris, go ahead and cue up the first one. There you are on the
You
moon.
must be stepping down on the moon at this point. 10.
Buzz, this is Houston. F2, I'm at the 1/160th second for shadow photography on the sequence camera. Okay. I'm at the foot of the ladder. The limb footbeds are only depressed in the surface about 1 or 2 inches, although the surface appears to be very, very fine-grained as you get close to it. It's almost like a powder. Ground mass is very fine.
Boy, look at those pictures. Wow. It's a little shadowy, but he said he expected that in the shadow of the lunar module. Armstrong is on the moon. Neil Armstrong, 38-year-old American, standing on the surface of the moon on this July 20th, 1969.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Now, Buzz, you'd been on the moon for, I think, 4.5 hours, maybe 6 hours before you got out. What were you doing in the capsule for 4.5, 5, 6 hours beforehand?
After landing, the mission planning allowed for two things to happen. One is to have a sleep period, 8 hours, or to go outside and explore outside. And it could be one or the other. So as a crew, we decided that if we were tired because we had to go around a couple times before we landed, we didn't want to have the flight plan say we were going to go out right away, because we would have to request mission control if they could let us sleep first. And that would make things sound worse to the public. So being smart astronauts, we decided that the flight plan would have the sleep period first. But if we landed and felt great, we would ask mission control, and they knew this, to change the sleep period so we would go outside first. So that's what we did.
Okay.
Now we came back in. Now when Neil got down to the bottom of the ladder, we had both decided that we might get tired outside, and the bottom of the ladder was quite a ways from the ground. So we probably ought to jump in 1/6 gravity and see whether we could make it easily. So Neil got down to the bottom of the ladder, jumped on up to the bottom rung. You don't really see that in that television, but I, looking out my side window, I could sort of see him doing that. So then I watched him pick up a contingency sample, and then I sent the camera down to him on a clothesline so that when I got down here, he could take my picture while I'm coming down. So I come down the ladder now, I get to the bottom, I jump down, and now I'm going to jump back up again. But I missed. I didn't jump hard enough. So the bottom rung of the ladder hit my shins. Didn't hurt, obviously, but Neil had put dust when he stepped up to the bottom rung of the ladder. So on my shins, you can see little smudges in every picture of me outside.
Now, I
Of
have
course,
a,
the next time I made it all the way up.
I have a question.
That's a point of trivia, of course. You know, you can't expect to be a winner every time.
I have read this week of remembrances that you were serving as an elder of the Webster Presbyterian Church at the time that you went to the moon, and that you took along the
Yeah,
elements.
so was John Glenn and Charlie Bassett.
Did you-
John rotated back, and then eventually Charlie was killed in that accident I was telling you about.
Did you receive communion on the moon? Is that correct?
I felt that as this mission approached, that we had to have symbols that were very appropriate. We had to have a patch that was designed. We had to have call signs. Some of the previous missions had Snoopy and Charlie Brown as their call signs. You know, little silly things like that. And of course, they put their names on the patch and had something classical about a number or a spacecraft. But I think we went to great, very respectable extremes to choose the eagle, the symbol of our country, with the earth in the background, the moon in front, and approaching to make a landing. And we had decided that the call signs of the lander were going to be eagle, and Mike Collins decided that his spacecraft would be called Columbia. Well, we wanted other people to sort of comment on the patch, so we went into a computer simulation, and the person in charge, the instructor, was a pretty smart guy. So we left this drawing out with him, and we went in and did our training. We came back out again, and we said, "What do you think about this?" And he said, "Well, that's real nice. It's very symbolic. But why don't you have the eagle taking the olive branch of peace to the moon?" Oh, my God. That was perfect. So we modified it, and just like the dove carrying the olive branch, we put the olive branch in the eagle's beak. And we put it up for approval. And the head of NASA Houston said, "No," because the claws of the eagle looked very ferocious. So we took the olive branch from the beak and put it in the claws, and that's the way an eagle picks up a salmon out of the river or whatever. So that's a little story that tells you about why and how the patch and the call signs came. I started saying one other thing. We were outside, and we were coming back in again. We tracked a lot of dust, lunar dust back in, and it was time to pressurize the cabin. Well, when you pressurize it, you take high-pressure oxygen, and you put it into the cabin, and that's lower pressure, and it gets cold. And but we needed to save weight, so we hooked up to the onboard system, disconnected the backpacks, depressurized, opened the hatch, threw the backpacks over. Now, I had put up an experiment outside that was a seismometer, going to detect moonquakes or whatever. Well, the people back in Houston said they could hear, they could read when the backpacks hit the ground. They were that sensitive. So it's cold in there, and we got to get ready to sleep. And being a co-pilot, I said to Neil, I take dibs on the floor. Now, there was only one flat place in that whole lander, and that was the floor. So I laid down on the floor, put my head on the right side. That's where the co-pilot is. And I kind of looked. We dimmed the light, and I saw in the dust something that just didn't belong there. It was about that big, black plastic with a little knurl on the end. And those of you who are familiar with circuit breakers, this was the end of a broken circuit breaker, lying there on the floor. Uh-oh. I wonder what circuit breaker it is. So I get up and the lights are on and I look the rows. Of course, some of them are out because you don't want power. You don't want power on the jettison parachutes. Well, we didn't have those in the lab, but it's an example where you don't want somebody to throw the switch and you have power on it. You might jettison the parachutes when you're around the moon. That's not too smart. So some of them are in and some of them are out. So I look along the rows and here's some out, here's some in. Oh, here's one that's not in and it's not out. And the label above it says engine arm. Wow. That's the one that's out when you get into it. When you get ready to land, you push it in and you start the engine, you make a landing, you land, you pull it out. Now you do your stuff on the surface, you get ready to go home, you push it in, you lift off and you go home. Not if it's broken off on the floor. So, Houston, you got a problem. Well, we missed that line. We saved it for Apollo 13.
Buzz, we have 10 minutes left.
Okay.
I gotta ask about Richard. Okay.
Okay, so they said, look, we're going to have people look over behind the panels and see if we can find anything. And it may take us a while. So you guys up there just go to sleep and we'll tell you when you wake up. I thought to myself, what did he say? There are two guys up here, and we may not get home. And they just said, go to sleep, we'll tell you when you wake up. Well, what they told us was they couldn't find any way to fix it. So they said, what you're going to have to do, instead of just immediately before the computer is going to turn the engine on, we'll do that 2 hours early. So now we get into the countdown, and I look at my little finger, and I figure now I could push it in, but there's electricity back there, and maybe that's not too smart. But I got a ballpoint pen. Uh-oh, that's metal. That's not too smart either. But I did have a felt tip pen. I pushed it in, and Houston says, hey, we got power, let's go. So in 2 hours, we go through the countdown. And I know what's going on in mission control. You know, the flight director is checking with everybody there, and they're each saying to him, his name is Flight, go Flight, go Flight. And then he says to the guy who talks to us, he says, Capcom, or go for liftoff. And the guy who was Capcom says, Tranquility Base, you're cleared for liftoff. I've been thinking a little bit. Roger, Houston, we're number one on the runway.
Buzz, let me conclude this way.
All right.
I want to play a clip.
So you want to know how we're going to get back to the moon? I know. It's not NASA's way. It's my way.
Your way. Let's play a clip, because we're at the Nixon Library, of President Nixon greeting you on the Hornet, because 50 years ago tonight you were descending, about to hit the water. If we can play the clip of the president, there you are.
What we all sense when you get back now, incidentally, have you been able to follow some of the things that happened when you've gone? Did you know about the All-Star game?
Yes, sir. The capsule communicators have been giving us daily news reports.
Yeah. Were you American League or National League?
I'm a National League man.
I'm nonpartisan, sir.
Yeah, that's right. There's the politician in the group, right?
We're sorry you missed that game.
Yes. Well, oh, you knew that too. You
Yeah,
really
we heard that
Yeah, the rain.
the rain.
Right.
Well, we haven't learned to control the weather yet, but that's something we can look forward to as tomorrow's challenge.
Right. Well, I can only summarize it because I don't want to hold you now. You have so much more to do. And gee, you look great. You feel as good as you look.
we
Feel great.
feel just perfect, Mr. President.
Yeah. Are you? I understand Frank Borman says you're a little younger by reason of having going into space. Is that right? Do you feel that way? A little younger?
We're a lot younger than Frank Borman.
So
Now,
Buzz,
believe it or not, I have a friend who's a telescope guy, and he says, Buzz, you know, I got a friend who has these Airstream trailers, mock-ups of them. That's what we were in for quarantine. And I said, hey, can you get one and send it to the Nixon Library? And maybe send one to the Hornet? So I'm waiting for you to bring in the Airstream trailer.
it's in the exhibit. Let me
It's in
close
the
by
exhibit.
asking this. You went on a 39-day, 27-city, 24-country Operation Giant Step that ended back at a private dinner at the White House. Michael Collins remarked on Mrs. Nixon's hospitality.
Right.
Can we close by your telling us about that dinner at the White House at the end of this long journey around the world of goodwill?
Sure, I don't remember what we ate,
I hope not. Yeah.
but I do remember that President Nixon said, well, now that you have landed on the moon, what do you think might be next? He said, Mike, I know that you've been talking to Secretary Rogers about perhaps working with him and maybe helping to calm down some of the unrest in some of the campuses. He said, Neil, what do you think you would like to do? And Neil said, well, you know, I'd like to continue to work in aeronautics with NASA in the National Aeronautics and Space, because he's pretty much of a flyboy, X-15 and test pilot. So he says, Buzz, what do you want to do? I said, Mr. President, I would just as soon like to go back to the Air Force and resume my career. And so that was it. Of course, I knew he didn't have all that much to do with things, but he could say a word or two here and there. Now, on the way from dinner, of course, my father being Swedish, during the mission, he had gone over to Sweden and had visited various people the guy who makes the camera, Victor Hasselblad, and Dad went up to northern Sweden where they have an ice hotel where you can go in and spend the night in this hotel or this mound made out of ice. And being Swedish, I felt that he really could be a great ambassador to Sweden. Not a very good idea. I suggested it to the president, but there was a football player who was at the top of the list, and he became the ambassador to Sweden. And now, back in the service, I thought, what's the best thing I could possibly do? I've been away from the service for 11 years, 3.5 at MIT and 7.5 with NASA. But I was at the Air Force Academy back in 55. Yeah, 55, when it first opened up. And I was aide to the dean of faculty then. But now I've moved on up to a grade of colonel, and that's about the kind of grade to be a commandant of cadets. So I thought, well, that's a good thing to do for 3 or 4 years. Somebody will tell me what I need to do, and I'll just be a role model, and that'll be fine. Now, one problem. I had a classmate in the class of 1951 whose last name was Vandenberg. He got that assignment. So now they're wondering, what are we going to do with Aldrin? Well, now, the unique thing about how I got into the astronaut program was not by going through the test pilot school. I had other things in mind. I wanted to be in combat units and operations. And when I found out by reading Life magazine over in Germany that you had to have been trained as a test pilot, man, that really sunk my spirits. So that's when I continued on to West Point, just feeling that that was it. But I went ahead and wrote my thesis on rendezvous, and then I began to become a real lobbyist. I volunteered for 62 class. Ed White, my good friend, was selected, and I wasn't. But I kept trying and lobbying different people. I finally was selected in 63. Now, you remember Ed White, my very good friend, was killed in the Apollo fire, along with Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee. I just met Ed's son and daughter just the other night. Tragedies happen like that, and we try and recover. We lost 2 crews in the space shuttle. Not that safe a machine, looking back on it. There are a number of things that you could critique in the space program from the middle of Apollo on. And I think now is a time where we can charge ahead with a next giant leap. The round-the-world trip was a giant step. But now we need another round-the-world trip called Next Giant Leap Alliance to visit the different space agencies around the world that we will be bringing together. These are the kind of ideas that come into my mind as to how to bring the world together, how to do things that can bring the U.S. and China together and not compete in space. And I hope that that turns out to be the case, because competing in space is very, very wasteful for both parties, and it leads to friction down here and way up there, and I think we're just so much better off. And I hope that's going to turn out to be the case.
Well, the thought you've put in my mind, Dr. Aldrin, is that I'm glad you finished your around-the-world tour at the White House, and I'm glad that you have concluded your 50th anniversary tour at the Nixon Library. And everyone here joins me in honoring you as an American hero. Thank you. I saw that. Ladies and gentlemen, who's going to sing God Bless America for us? There we go.
God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. I want to ask you to sing it with me as we go sing it one more time. And God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with the light from above. From the mountains to the prairies, to the oceans wide with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Buzz Aldrin. Thank you all for coming. Good night and safe travel home.